Oh, hi. Are you here for the fun question? Me too. The Fun Question, a show where we explore the strange and powerful ways people engage in a life of fun. I'm your host, Dr. David Thomas, the professor of fun, coming to you from my hidden lair and back for another episode of Playful Exploration. My guest today is Drew Davidson. Drew is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, a producer and player of interactive media, as well as a giant, in my opinion, of indie academic publishing, first through his creation of the ETC Press, and now with Play Story Press. Now, I know Drew as a warm, curious, and engaged teacher and colleague who has this endless fascination with play. He and I met 20 years ago at the foundation of what many people would consider video game studies. And we've both been fascinated with how we play, what we play, and how to think about play, and how to teach students about play. Drew in particular is really obsessed with the idea of narrative and stories in play, and we'll get to that too. But what I want to talk to Drew about today is his latest work and truly a magnum opus of play research, Ludic Narrans, Playing Around, Stories of, by, and for Fields of Play, and the same book in a completely different configuration called Ludic Narrans, Playing It Straight, Stories of, by, and for Fields of Play. We'll talk about that too. So yes, in addition to thinking about play, Drew is playing around with research in the same way he's helped play with academic publishing and academic life. Full disclosure, I am one of the people interviewed in Drew's book, so I have a little tiny bit of skin in the game. But with that, let's just dive into the topic. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks, David. It's nice to hear that you can turn on a radio voice.
Great. I know this is terrible to think that this is my radio voice, but so Professor, my first question for you has got to be: what in the world is a Ludic Narrans? Oh my gosh, you're throwing Latin at us first thing in the morning, teacher. Come on.
Well, I had to be a little pretentious, but I had no idea that was going to be the title till I was looking for just stuff in terms of like some references around. I was really interested. I was looking at the book with the interviews to also go, well, okay, there's so much publication out there about play. So many people have been grappling with this and thinking about this and like really trying to evoke what it means in our lives. So I wanted to try to weave that in as well. And I was like, well, I've written some stuff. So I was looking through it, and in my dissertation, which I'm going to date myself, I was studying Myst, not the whole video game.
Oh, the video game.
I was really curious about that kind of like playful storytelling. And at the time, like you were saying at the beginning of sort of the studies of the game studies and stuff like that, it kind of came up when there was like the ludology versus the narratology, trying to think about what makes games unique and how to experience them and express what they mean. And I wasn't the only one, but a lot of us started talking about Ludic Narrans as in playful stories as one way to try to highlight the uniqueness of what a story you experience through the playing of a game.
So Ludic, Latin for play, and then Narrans, Latin for stories. So tell me about that.
When I saw that in my dissertation, I was like, well, there's the title. I've been thinking about this for a while.
Right on. So before we talk about what's in the book, can you just physically describe what the book is? Because it's truly massive.
Yes. Well, so like fortunate, I ran a program for about 10 years, and when I was stepping aside as the director, I got a sabbatical, and I was like, I'm going to do this study. And I'm very curious to talk, like you were saying, talk to people about play, how it fits in their lives, their work, their interests. I thought I'd do a little, I'll do some surveys, get some around, I'll do a few interviews. And people kept offering, and the interviews were so inspiring. I ended up doing 175 interviews. I actually ended up doing a little bit more than that, but some people had to pull out for legal, like my company doesn't want to talk, or things like that. Lost touch with a couple people, and I was very collaborative. So it's like I'm uncomfortable now that I can't keep up with somebody to include them without their input. But the book became this idea as I was going through all these interviews and reading them and trying to sort of glean. And I was looking very qualitatively. I was like, what are the themes and threads? What are the stories we're sharing? And it started feeling like, in my mind, a thematic oral history. It's like a lot of us are saying very similar things wherever we're coming from, because I was going broad. I wasn't going like, hey, David, tell me what you think play is. I was just sort of like, what do you think is it in your life? I wasn't going to force anybody. And so I ended up talking to musicians and athletes and game designers and child psychologists and people out of theater, just this huge range and wealth of people. And it felt very resonant what we were talking about as play fit in our lives. So that sort of, as I was going through and coding the interviews, and those became like topical themes that a lot of people talk about performance or engagement or their childhood when they're thinking about play. I think the number one topic that I coded the most was culture, like how our culture shapes our play, or how there is a culture within our how we play and stuff like that. And so that became this idea of like, well, God, these themes are starting to come up, and I started going like, well, David said something brilliant here, and Lisa said this, and then Jill said that, and then G1 said this, and started like taking things out of context. That's why I was trying to be really collaborative with the interviewees, because I was like, well, your interview's about to get chopped up and put together as a conversation with other interviews, as if we were all sort of, riffing on a topic. So we were editing it to that with in mind. And then as I was pulling together the themes, the reason there's like two versions is I was like, oh my God, these themes are in conversation with each other. A lot of this stuff around performance really relates to what people say when they talk about engagement. And so I was like, it just came to my mind. It's like, what if it's like a deck of cards, and there's one version of the book where everything's in the order, and the other version of the book, we just shuffle the deck and then see how it is and to experience it. And I had so much fun dipping in and out of the shuffled version. I was like, this, in my mind, is like the ultimate version, and the more scholarly references, but I was like, well, they kind of need each other, because if I took away the one in order, you wouldn't understand why it was such a mess. The other ones.
So we've got two books. They're both about 700 pages long. One are just the collection of interviews.
Almost 800 both.
800, okay. So one's a collection of interviews where you can just read the interview kind of as done, edited. The second is mixed together, and you edited thematically. And I'll just say this.
Well,
this
actually,
is right out of
they're
your
both
book.
edited thematically. Neither of them had the interviews verbatim.
Just okay.
One's just sort of like, oh, here's everything about culture, everything about childhood and family, and then the other one's like a little bit of culture mixed in with childhood, mixed in with music, mixed in with
You kind of did your own meta narrative in that one. Okay.
Right.
Well, here's what you wrote. He says, this book is a collage of quotes, citations, and commentary that weaves together a variety of perspectives on play. So it's done. You got it all together. What do we do with this thing now that we have it? It's a doorstop. We know that. It's enormous.
Yeah. Right.
What do we do with it? What do we as scholars do with it? What a just average person on the street wants to read this book? What do they do with it?
Well, what's fun, and you and I have talked about this for years, like I'm a big believer in open access. So the idea that there's a free version, because like you said, it's a doorstop, and because of just cost of publication,
printing and shipping,
even just buying the print version, it's weighty. But you can download something for free on PDF. I feel like it's a great reference just to get a temperature check on what sort of like people in the creative fields, in like education and social impact are really thinking about and grappling with, and playing around with ideas in their lives and their careers, and ways to make a difference, ways to make change. And so I think it's like, in my mind, I get a lot of inspiration out of it. It gives me a lot of hope. I'm like, oh my God, these are, you included, like amazing people thinking about amazing things, and really trying to like, God, not to get too grand, but it's like, living life to the fullest, looking for what matters. And then like, that's why I love the two versions, because the one that feels like scholar, I'm like, it's a great reference if you want to go kind of dig in there and see what people, like I was talking to some colleagues at other universities who are very interested in looking at it quantitatively. And of course they would love to get to your point, or like the full-on transcripts of the interviews, which we're pulling together. Like, I'm kind of going weirdly backwards. I immediately started pulling the interviews apart, and I'm like, let's see if I can get a good, accurate transcript just for the record. But the book itself, I think one of my colleagues was like, I think I'm going to have to analyze this book, just as a, as a object, and see like what's going on there, just so like, can they take it through and sort of look at it from a data perspective of what's coming up.
Well, give me your reaction. So you talked to a lot of people. What were some of the things that were just kind of everybody's repeating to you and you feel are pretty established as good insights? And then what were the marginal weird things that you're like, interesting?
It's the things that resonate a lot is like the importance of play as a kid. A lot of people, and this doesn't surprise you, because if you start talking to experts, they say, oh my gosh, that's what childhood's all about, is you play to learn and experience and everything. And it's just interesting as people go, oh yeah, and ranging from my parents supported it to I had to find it outside of the home to, so there's just this huge thing of people seeing that it's important. And then another universal thing that kind of came up is that sort of weird transition of like, at a certain point, we culturally are expected to leave such playful things behind us. You grow up, be more serious, be an adult, be professional. And it felt like a lot of the people I talked to was like, well, hold on, I don't buy into that 100%. So I'm going to be a bit of a rebel. I'm going to be a bit of I'm going to try to keep this in my life. And a subset of sort of that idea is like there's a bit of a struggle with play. It's like you're going to have to kind of fight to be able to sort of like fight for your right to party. You have to kind of like push to allow yourself to play when there's a lot of structural systemic things in our culture that kind of want to suck it out.
Any idea what that is? Why do we love play and having fun so much, but then suppress it all the time? Why are all those barriers to play there? Is it just the Protestant work ethic? Is it play seems childish?
Yeah, right?
Is it something? Did something else emerge from this? Like why are we so reluctant to play when all we want to do is play?
I think it's like there's something inherent, like natural and biological. Because I talked to a couple people who study, animal play and in the kingdom of animals and how it's throughout there as well. And some surprising, like I saw some things around how bees play and how octopus play and stuff like that. And you're like, all right. And so it's really interesting looking at that. And like there's a wonderful book called The Kingdom of Play, where it's like a popular science book on looking at why we think animals, us included, play. And he did a nice job sort of walking us through like, well, here's the theory, but let me show you how that started falling apart through subsequent studies. And the one that seemed to continue to have legs, and I think it's still viable today, was this idea of play as preparation for the unexpected. It allows us to practice, things in like, oh, if I get really good at falling down and getting up, the next time I'm being chased by a predator and I fall, I'll be able to get up and keep going. Because I didn't plan to do that fall, so it's interesting that way. So like there's some inherent nature of like, and that's sort of how we all explore. So I do think it sort of feels like, okay, they've been able to show that like the younger you are, the more play you do. And even in like the wildlife, as you get older, you play less. And there's, all kinds of hypotheses around it. It's like as you age and your energy levels and blah, 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 blah. I think too, societally, or at least at a human level, there's this sense of like, well, the chaotic anarchic nature, the anarchy that can play makes people go, hey, I want to control. No, it's this weird thing in business where like, I want you to be innovative. You're going to do things you've never done, but don't have too much fun. I need you to be serious and clock in and clock out. And, they say they want you to be creative, but they don't want to, watch you have fun while you're like, I need you to be serious. Like Lorne Michael did this wonderful thing. I was in Comedians in Cars with Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. And they were walking through the SNL studios. And he said something like, what's amazing is you watch it's like watching monkeys. All the writers are out in the hallways playing around and they're doing this stuff. And then every weekend there's a show. And he's like, and I've come to realize they need that sort of like crazy, wild stuff to let the juices flow as opposed to, get down and be funny,
Yeah. So that sounds right that, we hear a lot about like, play as a kind of rebellion. Really, it's just because we want innovation, we want creativity, but we want compliance and control just as much.
Control.
They come into conflict. Yeah. So what surprised you about the study? Yeah, good.
Bernie DeKoven had this, he liked to say like playing in public is a political act because people will be like, what are you doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Bernie, rest in peace. Great scholar of true play. Yeah. So what surprised you? I mean, who said things that really made you question your own views on play?
I mean, I feel like because I love music, but I'm not a musician, so I was really fascinated by the people that kind of anybody I talked to who had a musical background or like musical that was their livelihood. It almost feels like the epitome of the virtues of play. Just like when you get into on so many levels, it's like learning how to play something and creating music and that sort of creativity and the vibrations of the music you're playing. There's all kinds of things they talk about how that gets us going and rhythm and beats and melody and harmony. And then you're doing that with somebody else. And so then you're like, a lot of them, they talk about jamming, like you get into this weird thing where magic happens, and then if that magic's happening with an audience who then's replying, and you're in conversation, you know. So it kind of like, I believe that, but I was just like, oh wow, is that interesting? Let's see other things that surprised me. Well, I kind of wanted to get into this, but I didn't have to push as much as I thought. I was like, okay, so play's not 100% positive. It's not all, you know, there's sort of like dark play and transgressive play, and another reason why people might, you know, but people really did start bringing that up, you know, in the world we live in, and sort of like bullying and things that happen online where like, hey, can't you take a joke? I'm just, you know, gaslighting and stuff like that. And so it's just interesting to sort of like look at ways, you know, play can be co-opted in nefarious ways. That
I've always thought pranks were a good example of that. Pranks are the people running the prank are at play. The person being pranked may or may not be at play with them. They may just be a victim. Right. Yeah.
And I didn't get to interview her because she was really, really busy. She was working on her own book. Celia Pierce was working on a book that came out just this year called Play Frames. Okay. And so it came out prior enough that I was able to look at it to help influence this book. And she was sort of like updating the idea of the magic circle with this idea of framing, because she was trying to say like, one of the things that always bothered her about the magic circle is kind of going real world, play. And she's like, that's not how life is. It's sort of like there's these layers of, you know, it's more nuanced to crime. Sometimes I'm playing, and sometimes I'm playing in the real world, and sometimes, you know, the real world comes into play. And
right, and the magic circle, this concept borrowed really from the literature that somehow to be at play you have to be in this magical space that's separate from the real world. And Celia talks about the magic circle as being permeable because she's a LARPer and as she's an academic, she's used to playing in public space, and you know, interesting. So that's interesting. So, you know, transgressive play, kind of leaky play, you know, quasi play. So that's in the book too. You actually looked at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your takeaway? Do you think is the world becoming more playful, less playful? Are we moving into a different form of play? Where read the tea leaves, Drew. What do we need to know?
Well, I think it's interesting because I feel like going through the pandemic, which is we still are like healing from that on individual and societal levels. I think a lot of people realize, oh my God, we need other people. Like a thing that came out of I did these interviews in 2024, so the pandemic was a little fresher even then. And people were just talking about, you know, oh God, I just realized coming out of the pandemic, I was like, how do I socialize again? You know, how do I like have casual fun times with friends? And, you know, the importance they say of like online games that kind of helped them through during the pandemic. And even going all the way back to Putnam's Bowling Alone from right around the turn of the century, this idea of like finding third places where we're engaging and playing together. Like it's in the book. Several people say this, but Jim G from currently he's at Arizona State University. I think he's emeritus now, but he was just talking about here's why I think society's breaking. And this came up several times in surprising ways of like the fact that we're not playing well together in general as a society. We feel like things are breaking down on all kinds of levels just because we do it more individually. We do it in our little silos. The internet's helped us. Like I play with people who are only like me, and stuff like that. And so that people are like, there's something that type of importance. And coming out of the pandemic, it's like, all right, I'm trying to relearn how to like, let's go have lunch at the very least, or you know, getting back into a headspace. Like at one time I was giving a talk on this and somebody brought up how like, I don't feel playful. How do I get there? And sometimes it's like, do you have a good conversation with the friend that makes you kind of feel like, well, we bonded, you know, and that could be the start of, it doesn't have to be like, I went out and had the time of my life. But so it felt like that. People are like, we know it's important, so let's see if we can do it. But then like we're living in interesting times / dumpster fire / oh my God. And so people, you know, feels like I firmly believe like play is a way we're going to make change, because if we figure out how to do things we've never done before with each other, that's how we'll be able to, you know, that's how you're thinking playfully, thinking about something from a different perspective to like push on, you know, what's beyond capitalism, because it's not working for everybody.
So you're saying less that we have to recover democracies or recover play. You're saying we need to become more playful as a culture, then maybe we'll discover a new form of, you know, democratic, humane engagement.
Yeah, maybe.
That's
Feels like
ambitious. I
we
like
just
that.
need to be like, yeah.
Well, let me take it back down a notch a little bit because not trying to summarize your entire academic career, but I think that your work with ETC Press and Play Story Press has been a very playful endeavor, and I think for people outside of academia, it's a little hard to see the fact that you don't run your presses like a traditional academic press, although they tend to produce equally good scholarship at volume as maybe the more structured. Can you talk a little bit about how play informs your own kind of scholarship, how it informed this book, how it informs
Yeah.
publishing? Because I feel
Well,
like
like,
you are at play as a scholar, not just as a scholar of play.
I would hope so. It's definitely I aspire, and part of it's like aspiration, and part of it's this feeling. I remember when I was coming into my master's program, and I was at the University of North Carolina, and I was very curious about media and communicating across different media.
Mm-hmm.
This is before I really got into games, but I was like, there's got to be a way to do scholarship that's not just writing a paper. Just felt like, and I was in a department that had performance studies, and so a lot of people are trying to do these, deep, meaningful, scholarly performances, as you were. So we start so I pitched my master's thesis I'm gonna write and draft and cast and direct a play in a museum about meaning and art, and that will be my thesis is the play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my committee was like, 100%, that's scholarship. And the graduate school is like, where's the paper? You're not graduating until you submit your thesis.
Okay, you need a document, hardcover document. Yeah.
And then the same thing happened when I was doing then I went on to my PhD studies, and I was studying with Sandy Stone at the University of Texas in Austin. And I was very curious more directly. I'm like, okay, computers are allowing us to share information and communicate in new ways, whether it's through games or just, sort of interactive media, sort of hypertextual, rhizomatic stuff. And I was like, I'm going to write my dissertation. It's going to be a website. It's going to be this, hypertextual, non-linear dissertation. Yeah. And the same thing. Committee's like, and it was about Myst and games and storytelling and playing and all that stuff. And I was throwing, pulling other stuff in because I was doing interviews into the industry as well. Talking to people, because I was in Austin, Texas. I talked to Richard Garriott, who was starting this new thing called Ultima Online, and Chris Roberts, who spun out and started a game/film studio to make Wing Commander the movie,
Yeah.
And all that. And so, anyways, same thing happened. Here's my website, and they're like, "Well, where's your paper?" So when I started thinking when I got into the Entertainment Technology Center, and I had this idea of wouldn't it be fun? There's not many forums or venues to allow people where people can write about and explore games in particular. But I was thinking we're in entertainment technology. What about theme parks? What about toys? All that stuff. Things that theme pop culture, so maybe low culture. And I was like, and I'd love it to be open access. I was a big proponent of I'd like to share. I want people to be out there, and I wanted it to be conversational, not not full of scholarly jargon. So I was just sort of, and CMU was very supportive. They let us sort of try to do this experimental imprint called ETC Press, where we're like, all right, it's open access, and we run it through. And we got knocked sometimes. We're like, oh, it's just vanity, because we were like, no, it's open access where we have editorial and everything goes through peer review, and we're partnering with Lulu just to have print if somebody wants a book, because I like physical books,
Yeah.
I still read primarily in a book.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that maybe, again, outside of academia, it's hard to understand. But I think one is that a lot of academic presses are very hidebound to specific methods. So you have to have a disciplinary method that people are familiar with. And that sounds really jargony, I suppose it is. But I think that's one of the things with ETC and Play Story is I think you've been very open to method, very much like your hypertext masters or your performance. You're saying there's different kinds of inquiry. It's not just running this particular statistical method that's approved by my discipline, and that has to be peer reviewed. So I think there was a sense there. I think your range of topics in both presses was very open. I know in the conversations I've had with you, you've very much been a improvisational yes and rather than a no. And I'm curious, as you kind of had your academic career, is this come from a place of rebellion, a place of obstinance, a place of playfulness, just opportunity? I mean, who are you, Drew? How did you get there?
Well, let's see. Well, okay, I'm gonna go back, and it's kind of in the book a little, but somebody was asking me because like I was interviewing a lot of people, and I had a conversation like, well, how was play in your life? And I was like, it's interesting because I grew up on the water, so a big thing was, it's like, is the weather good? Can you go sailing, or is it, is the wind light so you go water skiing or canoeing? And we went scuba diving, like. I just played on the water a lot, and it gave you this weird thing where you were really connected with nature because there's, it's that sort of thing like you can't control the wind, but you can set your sails, or, you're surfing and the waves, you got to go where the wave takes you, but you've got some control in there. Kind of, my wife noticed me, it's like, that's kind of how you deal with problems in life. Like, it's almost like, thinking about like water and nature as a sort of improvisational, but also like a form of stoicism or something. It's like you can only do what you can do, and then you're like, but then it's like, oh my god, having grown up on the coast of North Carolina, lots of hurricanes, and there's this saying of like, oh, it's just the price you pay for living in paradise, but it gets wiped out a lot. And so you get lots of weather where you're like, okay, we gotta like tape up the windows and huddle and hope. And stuff like that. And we're having storms now that are crazy weird and intense. And so that sort of like idea of like, I don't know, just sort of informed how I think about living life and meaning in my life. And it's sort of like, just this very like, you go with the flow, or you're swimming against yada, 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 and all that. Those metaphors just started like making me think about how I experience stuff. And so I did get really interested just with some of my professors and stuff, thinking about, and I think it comes from play, but also like stubbornness of like, there's got to be other ways. There's not just one way. There's not just one right. That was so much fun about. That's why I ended up being like stories of by for the fields of play. And some people were like, what's a field of play? I've never heard that before. And it's like, there's actually this one guy who writes all about it, but it's a specific thing. But I was like thinking about playing fields. Does that feel like sports? Does that feel like a playground? Does that feel, And it's just like, we're all sort of like, that openness is something I find really appealing, of sort of looking for the opportunity and like being open to letting it manifest in ways that I'm like, I felt like at a certain point, I was just following where the study wanted to go. I was less in control anymore, and more just like, I'm following where it feels like it's manifesting into itself.
Yeah.
With everybody's involvement and input.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you were losing the focus on play, or do you feel like that you feel pretty comfortable the book is about play?
I feel like because of that openness, it kept more and more manifesting what play is. So like, if, I feel like that's why I love the two versions together. I'm like, oh my God. In some ways, I'm like, I feel like this is a playful object. And like my wife, who's, a collage artist and works in a lot of stuff, she would probably say I'm an amateur, but she just does all this beautiful stuff. And we started talking about it, and we had some friends over one time, and we were talking, and he was like, her art should be in your book. And she was like, I'll think about it. And we were talking afterwards going, it's really great, because what's so much fun about this book to me is sort of like all the 175 people involved. I'm like, this is great because of us. And I might have been writing hurt on it, but all the mistakes are mine, and all the amazingness is because this group of people are just interesting. And I don't think that's unique. Like I was telling somebody what was so weirdly inspiring was like, I do believe like talking to 175 people has changed my life. Made me a better person, in some weird ways where I'm like, this really altered who I am and how I do things, and feel like I'm a better person because of all of this. And all I did was talk to people. Like, is that the solution? Is like better conversations and just having good chats and like attending to people? And so like I tried to sneak that in there, but then I was like, so all that, I think this is a really good book. Like you said, like I think this is the best thing I've ever done. Yeah. And then my wife was willing to share her art and sort of curate it in. I'm like, and now it's beautiful as well as
that's awesome.
Meaning. And we were like, we did this whole thing about the metaphors and how we thought they lined up, and we were like, we're just doing it associatively. So sort of like, and so many people have written going, I see why you picked this piece for that topic. And I was like, that's not why we picked that, but I see what you're saying,
Well, someone asked me, what's Drew's book for, or what's it about? And I think that this conversation right here puts it into perspective. This is scholarship at play. This is the method and the outcome of what it looks like to have an open, like to surf through scholarship rather than to mine through hard rock, right? It's to be a part of the environment. Yeah, well. So I got to ask you this though. you've been studying play through all these people. What is play? What's your definition?
Oh my God, that's one of the things I avoided the whole study. I'm like, well, for me, it's sort of like in those it's hard to define it. Like, I'm not somebody who likes to go like, let me define it and give it constraints, even though I think that allows us to be more creative in general. Like, I feel like the themes start going like, play is open, play is tapping into the childhood, play is like social, play is, experimental, and it can be just transgressive. Sometimes you play and you can kind of play around with hierarchies of roles. Like, you could play around with your boss at work and, all kinds of weird things where that's why they get uncomfortable. So I think for me, like, one of my favorite, it was Marie LeBlanc Flanagan, who said it's sort of like, play is that unmistakable feeling you're in that's almost undescribable when you're out of it. Because you just sort of like get into that state where you just like, sometimes it feels like the imp of the perverse. Remember Poe's sort of thing of like, like, hoo, like it just feels like things are tingling. And you might be transgressive because why not? It's like I was talking to a colleague. I'm going to name him because I always like to give him a hard time. Gary Goldberger. And he was talking about one time he got pulled by a cop because he was doing something stupid. And the cop was like, were you trying to be funny? And he was like, yes, I was. And he was like, I should not have said that. But in the moment, he just like, you teed it up.
Yes. And yeah, for sure. Well, great. I'm going to encourage everybody to grab at least a free copy of the book, although the print copy is really a lot of fun. But we got to do one more thing before we fully wrap up here, and it's the lightning round, where I just ask you some random questions, and you get about a sentence to answer them. Okay. So right. I'll start with the easy one, which is like, who's not in the book that you would have loved to have in the book, living or dead, real or imaginary?
Oh my God, there's so many people who just were. Like, I would love to have had Mary Flanagan and Tracy Fullerton and Henry Jenkins. There's just colleagues that I was specifically like, can you do it? And they're like, oh, I'm busy. We'll find time. And, like, I can't tell you how many times Mary and I are like, okay, next week. And then something would fall apart, and then it's just like, oh, I have to, And so, similarly, like what you're doing here with the fun question, I'm like, I hope to keep having these conversations. I'd like to start a podcast where I continue to talk to people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. So,
Bernie,
fantasy,
to your point?
Fantasy.
Bernie?
Yeah, Bernie DeKoven. He'd be a great one. Fantasy character. Who would be a great addition to your book from the world of fiction, since you're a narrative guy?
From the world of fiction. Okay. Hold on. Geez, I hadn't thought of that before. Wow. I mean, it's interesting because immediately I started thinking children's literature and, things like the various perspectives of the Winnie the Pooh characters. That might be really interesting, just all of them, because you've got Eeyore, Kangaroo, Owl.
Yeah. Love that. So I guess the next question would be, this is an enormous work. It took you years of time. Would you do it again? Are you going to do it again?
Well,
Ludic Narrans, Volume
yes.
3. Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be that. Like, one of the things that I thought was really, like, when I finished talking to Betty G., Jim's wife, and better half, I would say, when we finished and we were wrapping up, it was after the interview, she was like, this is the rest of your career if you want it to be. And I was like, I should be so lucky to just chat with people about what matters in their lives and how play is. It's just very inspiring and hopeful. And so that's why I'm like, okay, podcasting. Like, I'm working on a card game based on the interviews. I'm working on a coffee table book based on it's just like providing people more ways to access the ideas and the sort of passion and inspiration.
So I guess one last question, quick question.
Yeah.
What makes a good question about play in all these interviews? What's your zinger?
The fun one in the interviews was because in an intense half hour, I would kind of go, hey, introduce yourself and tell me about yourself. And then, and how you think play fits into your lives. And since it was like an intense time where somebody go, well, let me roll back to when my parents got me this or when we did this. And then they kind of walk through and stuff like that. I was able to go, oh my God, have you ever thought, like, right now you're doing this, how that connects to what you're doing there? And half the time somebody go, that never occurred to me. Until you just said it. But it was just, since I am listening, I was able to like, wow, you talked about when you were a kid, you cared about this, and now you do this. It feels like they match. And then some people are like, of course, that's my whole life.
Yeah. Good journalistic technique. Let the subject talk. Well, Drew, I really appreciate the time. I mean, I always love talking to you. The book's remarkable. I think it's, and again, I want to emphasize, you can buy it, but there is a downloadable copy. So it's been part of
you get
publishing.
In Professors at Playlist, you said something I thought was spot on. Like it was like being at a cocktail party of people talking about play.
It is. Like that. Yeah, it is. It is. You could be by yourself and be at the cocktail party, eavesdropping on everyone. Well, thanks a lot. Looking forward to seeing the card game, the podcast, everything else that comes out of it. And, you truly are a scholar of play, but also a playful scholar. I think the latter is probably more important than the former. So,
can I say one last thing?
Absolutely.
Just because I think it was interesting, this study is what inspired Play Story Press. Talking to all these people, I'm like, what if we take the press out of the ivory tower and have it be run by the community? And people like you and Professors at Play were like, yes, and it just blew up from there. And that's been amazing.
And going strong. Lots of cool stuff on the press. Yeah, good. All right, thanks, Drew. We'll be in touch.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye. So what is play? It looks like it's something that we'll have to continue to research, discover, talk about. I really appreciate Drew's perspective and his willingness to just engage in the topic and really more like an anthropologist, just go out there and just talk to people and then think about what he heard. And 175 interviews, that's pretty extraordinary. But I think he had fun doing it. And while we didn't really talk as directly about what makes playful scholarship fun, I think it's implied in my definitions I've offered in the past that I think play is the activity and fun is how you feel about it. I think it's clear that Drew has been having fun with his scholarship. And I think by having fun with his scholarship, he has created playful and very fun pieces of scholarship that are worth reading. So even if you're not in academia, even if you don't think about technical definitions of fun or play, you're not going to run quantitative or qualitative studies against the data, just picking up Ludic Narrans and just flipping through it and reading, it's very fun. It really is kind of like eavesdropping on a big cocktail party conversation, which is in and of itself fun. So I think that this idea of the academy being interested in play, the academy being interested in fun, of higher education's role vis-a-vis fun. Now, my background in Professors at Play, the organization that encourages playfulness in higher education, is really symmetrical with the kind of academic work that Drew is doing through Ludic Narrans, which is to just bring playful creativity into inquiry, of getting people to start to see learning and discovery is actually as much fun as shooting skeet or bowling or playing video games or rollerblading, whatever it is. Trying to start to think about fun as a pro-social activity that engages you in meaning making and discovery. And so I love talking to Drew about these things because, you think about reedy academics in the ivory tower, and they may not seem like that much fun, but I think at its best, higher ed is a play place. Scholarship is playful, and learning is fundamentally a play activity. So that's what we got. Now you've talked about play and academy. What's next? We'll find out.